If you want to encounter the subconscious, then what could be a better place to look than where consciousness is absent? That is, the realm of dreams and sleep. When you sleep, you are quite literally unconscious, which means that anything that you are experiencing is what is not conscious. In dreams, we are so unconscious, in fact, that we participate in the dream without even questioning the impossible events that take place. We might fly across the sky or teleport and so forth because our conscious ego and understanding is near completely inhibited in sleep. That is the first reason why dreams are so valuable to pay attention to if you're looking to come to understand the nature of your own being and your true self. They present only the raw facts of the unconscious, which is to say, the truth of what's really going on inside your head. The dream is, so to speak, a fact of the unconscious. And I want to quote to you an excerpt from Jung in one of his books, A Modern Man in Search of a Soul, and I have it with me here. This is an excellent book for those of you that are looking to get into dream analysis. If you want an introduction into dream analysis and a good exposure, I would highly recommend starting with this book. The very first chapter is actually called Dream Analysis in its Practical Application. So I'd highly recommend it. But something Jung said that has direct relevance to this point I'm trying to make. He said, the dream comes in as the expression of an involuntary psychic process not controlled by conscious outlook. It presents the subjective state as it really is. It has no respect for my conjectures or for the patient's views as to how things should be, but simply tells how the matter stands. I have therefore made it a rule to put dreams on a plane with physiological fact. Now, not only are dreams made of material that is not affected by conscious bias, but it also appears to be the case, both from what I've read in Jung and in my personal experience, if that is to be counted, that the more emotionally charged something is, the more likely it is to show up in a dream. This quality of emotional charge Jung called numinosity, and numinosity to Jung was the quality that made something special to the psyche. And he observed in his multiple decades of interpreting dreams that the more numinous or emotionally charged something was, the more likely it was to appear in a dream and the more intense its appearance would be. So then, we have a second quality of dreams, which is numinosity or emotional charge. So following on from that, it's evident both from Jung's writings and his personal work as a psychologist that numinosity and emotional charge of a particular thing is heavily decreased when it is consciously understood or recognized. In other words, when a certain thing is raised to the level of conscious awareness, it is, in Jung's words, exposed to the disinfecting power of sunlight. What this means is that a third quality of dream contents is usually that it is not consciously understood or recognized. So then, we can therefore say that dream contents as psychological material have three basic criteria. 1, independence from conscious bias. 2, a lack of conscious awareness. And 3, numinosity or emotional charge. So you don't dream about something if it has no emotional charge or if it's consciously understood, because the dream is almost always a compensatory function. It is a reflex, a balancing force of the psyche that seeks to express images, feelings, and energy that has been repressed and unrecognized. To demonstrate this point, I'd like to read you again a short excerpt from the same book. So Jung wrote as follows. If anyone should set out to replace his conscious outlook by the dictates of his unconscious, he would only succeed in repressing the former, and it would reappear as an unconscious compensation. The unconscious would thus have changed its face and completely reversed its position. It would have become timidly reasonable in striking contrast to its former tone. It is not generally believed that the unconscious operates in this way, yet such reversals constantly take place and constitute its essential function. This is why every dream is a source of information and a means of self-regulation, and why dreams are our most effective aids in the task of building up the personality. So, if dreams are made from things that are meaningful, not understood, and point to the direction of balance, can't we say that dreams are one of the most important things to pay attention to in our lives? If we are to come to understand our true nature and what we are as human beings, especially what we are as individuals, then dreams are possibly the single most important and readily available tools that we have to do so. If analyzed well, a series of dreams will reveal, for lack of a better description, the words of your being and soul that you have failed to hear. I think really, the best way that I can communicate to you the importance of the dream is by using some examples that Jung himself cited in his writings. I want to read you again from the same book some case studies that Jung gave to demonstrate his points. And I think these dreams, I think they rarely do demonstrate the point and nature of dreams and how they relate to the flow of meaning in a person's life. So the first example, and I'm reading this again from Modern Man in Search of a Soul. If you are interested in reading it for yourself, I think it's like $40 on eBay, something like that for the paperback version. I would highly recommend it. Anyway, let me give you an example of a dream and why it can be so influential. I was consulted by a man who held a prominent position in the world. He was afflicted with a sense of anxiety and insecurity and complained of dizziness, sometimes resulting in nausea, of a heavy head and difficulty in breathing. This being an exact description of the symptoms of mountain sickness. He had an unusually successful career and had risen with the help of ambition, industry, and native talent from a humble origin as the son of a poor peasant. Step by step he had climbed, attaining at last an important post that offered him every opportunity for further social advancement. He had actually reached a place in life from which he could have begun his ascent into the upper regions when suddenly his neurosis intervened. The fact that he had all the symptoms of mountain sickness was highly appropriate to the peculiar situation in which he found himself. He had brought with him to the consultation 2 dreams of the preceding night. The first dream was as follows. Okay, so this is the first dream. So see if you can guess the meaning of this dream as an introduction into dream analysis. I am in a great hurry because I am going on a journey. I hunt up my baggage, but I cannot find it. Time flies and the train will soon be leaving. Finally, I succeed in getting all my things together. I hurry along the street and discover that I have forgotten a briefcase containing important papers. Dash breathlessly back again, find it at last, and then run towards the station, but make hardly any headway. With a final effort, I rush onto the platform only to find the train steaming out into the yards. It is very long and runs in a curious S-shaped curve. It occurs to me that if the driver is not careful and puts on full steam when he comes to the straight stretch, the rear coaches will be still on the curve and will be thrown over by the speed of the train. As a matter of fact, the driver opens throttle as I try to shout. The rear coaches rock frightfully and are actually thrown off the rails. There is a terrible catastrophe. I awake in terror. Here too we can understand, without much difficulty, the situation represented by the dream. Okay, now this is going to be Jung's commentary. I think it's worth listening to because he offers his own interpretation, which of course you would want to listen to. Listen to the guy himself. Here too we can understand without much difficulty the situation represented by the dream. It pictures the patient's frantic haste to advance himself still further. Since the driver at the front of the train goes thoughtlessly ahead, the coaches behind him rock and finally overturn. That is, a neurosis is developed. So Jung here is equating the overturning of a train to the development of a neurosis. So I suppose, on that note, generally speaking, when you have some catastrophe or some disaster that happens in a dream, it's usually in accordance with the development of a neurosis in real life. Not always, but it tends to be like that. Also, interestingly, Jung actually said that a common symbol that would show up on the onset of schizophrenia was a nuclear bomb going off. But I digress. It is clear that at this period of life, the patient had reached the highest point of his career, that the effort of the long ascent from his lowly origin had exhausted his strength. He should have contented himself with his achievements, but instead he is driven by his ambition to attempt to scale the heights of success for which he is not fitted. The neurosis came upon him as a warning. Circumstances prevented my treating him, and my view of his case did not satisfy him. The upshot was that the events ran their course in a way indicated by the dream. He tried to exploit the professional openings that tempted his ambition, and ran so violently off the track that the train wreck was realized in actual life. The patient's anamnesis permitted the inference that the mountain sickness pointed to his inability to climb any further. The inference is confirmed by his dreams, which present this inability as a fact. We here come upon a characteristic of dreams that must take place first in any discussion of the applicability of dream analysis to the treatment of a neurosis. The dream gives a true picture of the subjective state, while the conscious mind denies that this state exists or recognizes it only grudgingly. The patient's conscious ego could see no reason why he should not go steadily forward. He continued his struggle for advancement, refusing to admit the fact, which subsequent events made all too plain, that he was actually at the end of his tether. When in such cases we listen to the dictates of the conscious mind, we are always in doubt. We can draw opposite conclusions from the patient's anamnesis. After all, the private soldier may carry a marshal's baton in his knapsack, and many a son of poor parents has achieved the highest success. Why should it not be so in my patient's case? Since my judgment is fallible, why should my own conjecture be more dependable than his? At this point, the dream comes in as the expression of an involuntary psychic process not controlled by the conscious outlook. It presents the subjective state as it rarely is. It has no respect for my conjectures or for the patient's views as to how things should be, but simply tells how the matter stands. I have therefore made it a rule to put dreams on a plane with physiological fact. That was the quote that I used at the beginning of this video, in case you forgot. So that was the first example I wanted to read to you guys, and I think what that demonstrates really quite well is how a dream can relate to a person's life in that it predicts what's going to happen. It describes the state of a human being in symbols, in pictures and images and feelings. In the case of this guy, he had spent so much time working that he was starting to, I presume, burn himself out. And as a consequence of that, he had this dream, and this dream said, hey, you better slow down. And that was demonstrated by the train going too fast, by lurching, and the carriages falling off. So, in his instance, his psyche, his dream is telling him, hey man, you are repressing your need to relax. You are repressing your need to slow down. Your psyche is at a point where it is no longer of the path of vitality and proper expression of your true self to continue down this path of excessive work. You've achieved enough. You've achieved to the degree that you actually want to achieve, and now you are pushing too much. You're pushing too much forward. And so now what this guy started to do is he has pushed over the edge of what he's meant to be doing. And so now he started to repress the need to slow down. He started to repress this feeling that he's heading to something bad. And that's exactly what it demonstrated in the dream. So I think that's a first good example. Okay, so this is the second example that I want to read to you guys. And I'm reading it just, again, directly from the book. If dreams did nothing more than inform us about the causal factors in a neurosis, we could safely let the doctor handle them alone. My way of dealing with them, moreover, would be quite superfluous if all that we could expect of them were a collection of hints and insights helpful to the doctor. But since it is probable, as I have shown in a few examples, that dreams contain more than practical helps for the doctor, dream analysis deserves very special consideration. Sometimes, indeed, it is a matter of life and death. Among many cases of the sort, I've been especially impressed with one that concerned a colleague of mine in Zurich. He was a man somewhat older than myself, whom I saw from time to time, and who always teased me on these occasions about my interest in dream interpretation. I met him one day in the street, and he called out to me, "How are things going? Are you still interpreting dreams? By the way, I've had another idiotic dream. Does it mean something too?" He had a dream as follows. I am climbing a high mountain over steep, snow-covered slopes. I mount higher and higher. It is marvelous weather. The higher I climb, the better I feel. I think, if only I could go on climbing like this forever. When I reach the summit, my happiness and elation are so strong that I feel I could mount right up into space. And I discover that I actually can do this. I go on climbing on empty air. I awake in a real ecstasy. When he had told me this dream, I said, "My dear man, I know you can't give up on mountaineering, but let me implore you not to go alone from now on. When you go, take 2 guides, and you must promise on your word of honor to follow their directions." "Incorrigible," he replied, laughing, and said goodbye. I never saw him again. 2 months later came the first blow. When out alone, he was buried by an avalanche, but was dug out in the nick of time by a military patrol which happened to come along. 3 months after this, the end came. He went on a climb accompanied by a younger friend, but without guides. An alpinist standing nearby saw him literally step out into the air as he was letting himself down a rock wall. He fell on the head of his friend who was waiting beneath him, and both were dashed to pieces far below. That was ecstasis in the full meaning of the word. No amount of skepticism and critical reserve has ever enabled me to regard dreams as negligible occurrences. Often enough they appear as senseless, but it is obviously we who lack the sense and the ingenuity to read the enigmatical message from the nocturnal realm of the psyche. When we see that at least half of a man's life is passed in this realm, that consciousness has its roots there, and that the unconscious operates in and out of waking existence, it would seem incumbent upon medical psychology to sharpen its perceptions by a systematic study of dreams. No one doubts the importance of conscious experience. Why then should we question the importance of unconscious happenings? They also belong to human life, and they are sometimes more truly a part of it, for weal or woe, than any events of the day. Dreams give information about the secrets of the inner life and reveal to the dreamer hidden factors of his personality. As long as these are undiscovered, they disturb his waking life and betray themselves only in the form of symptoms. This means that we cannot effectively treat the patient from the side of consciousness alone, but must bring about a change in and through the unconscious. As far as present knowledge goes, there is only one way of doing this. There must be a through-going, conscious assimilation of unconscious contents. By assimilation, I mean a mutual interpenetration of conscious and unconscious contents. I'm actually going to repeat that to you guys because I think that's actually a very essential point that Jung makes. So it's not a one-sided movement either way. It's not the conscious mind dominating the unconscious. It's not the unconscious then dominating, taking precedence over the conscious mind. It's a mutual interpenetration of conscious and unconscious contents. I continue. and not, as is too commonly thought, a one-sided valuation, interpretation, and deformation of unconscious contents by the conscious mind. So, I think that example really demonstrates well, aside from the commentary, which is obviously very valuable. I think something else that it is excellent in demonstrating is, in his case, this guy who had this dream. He dreamt that he would climb up this mountain and he loved it. He was in ecstasy. And then at one point, he actually stepped out into the air and kept on climbing forever. And what this is demonstrating is that this guy, in his dream, was showing the tendency to step out into air. And if you take that seriously, if you take that as a indication of an impulse which is not being consciously recognized, then it applies to his potential tendency to literally step out into air, which actually happened. The guy went out on a hike with his friend and he literally stepped out into the air and he died. So, that's another instance of some situation where your subconscious is already 10 steps ahead of you. It knows where you're moving and knows the way in which you want to behave. And again, if that guy had paid attention to his dreams, then maybe he wouldn't have died. It's a very, very telling example in my opinion. Now, the third example I wanted to read to you guys. Here we are. Okay. And again, reading from Jung's words, just the little bit before and then after the dream, just because it helps contextualize it. But here we go. I should like to show, with the help of an illustration, how important it is to find the true value of unconscious contents. A young man brought before me the following dream. See if you guys can interpret this. Maybe pause after I finish the dream. Give it your best guess. My father is driving away from the house in his new car. He drives very clumsily, and I get very excited about his apparent stupidity. He goes this way and that, forward and backward, repeatedly getting the car into a tight place. Finally, he runs into a wall and badly damages the car. I shout at him in a perfect rage, telling him he ought to behave himself. My father only laughs, and then I see that he is dead drunk. So, Jung continues to write here, there is no foundation in fact for the dream. The dreamer is convinced that his father would never behave in that way, even if he were drunk. The dreamer himself is used to cars. He is a careful driver and is very moderate in the use of alcohol, especially when he has to drive. Bad driving and even slight injuries to the car irritate him greatly. The son's relation to his father is good. He admires him for being an unusually successful man. We can say, without any attempt at interpretation, that the dream presents a very unfavorable picture of the father. What then should we take its meaning to be as far as the son is concerned? Is his relation to his father good only in appearance, and does it rarely consist of overcompensated resistances? If this was so, we should attribute a plus sign to the dream content. We should have to tell the young man, this is your actual relation to your father. But since I could find nothing equivocal or neurotic in the facts about the son's relation to his father, I had no warrant for disturbing the young man's feelings with such a destructive pronouncement. To do so would have prejudiced the outcome of the treatment. But if his relation to his father is rarely excellent, why must the dream manufacture such an improbable story to discredit the father? The dreamer's unconscious must have a distinct tendency to produce such a dream. Has the young man resistances to his father after all, which are perhaps fed by jealousy or a certain sense of inferiority? But before we go out of our way to burden his conscience, and with sensitive young people there is always the risk that we do this too lightly, we had better for once drop the question of why he had this dream and ask ourselves instead, what for? The answer in this case would be that his unconscious clearly tries to depreciate his father. If we take this as a compensation, we are forced to the conclusion that his relation to his father is not only good, but even too good. The young man actually deserves the French sobriquet of Filza papa. Filza papa. Hey, don't quote me on my French, man. His father is still too much the guarantor of his existence, and he is still living what I call a provisional life. He runs the risk of failing to realize himself because there is too much father on every side. This is why the unconscious manufactures a kind of blasphemy. It seeks to lower the father and to elevate the son. An immoral business, we may be tempted to say. Every father who lacks insight would be on his guard here, and yet this compensation is entirely to the point. It forces the son to contrast himself with his father, and that is the only way in which he can become aware of himself. The interpretation just outlined was apparently the correct one, for it struck home. It won the spontaneous assent of the young man and did no violence to his feeling for his father, or to the father's feeling for him. But this interpretation was only possible when the father-son relation had been studied in the light of all the facts that were accessible to consciousness. Without a knowledge of the conscious situation, the true meaning of the dream would have remained in doubt. So, what this dream demonstrated again was that this individual had an intuition, a subconscious feeling, which started to manifest in his life, but again, he didn't recognize it. He didn't quite understand what it was in his relation to his father that was causing him trouble, and it was demonstrated in the dream. So, in each case of the dreams that I've described, there was a particular thing that was not consciously recognized, which held emotional value, which then presented itself in the dream. In the first example, we had a young man who had climbed the corporate ladder, and he had worked very, very hard to do so. And he had reached a point where it was no longer of the interest of his natural psyche to continue to work. It was now depreciating of his vitality. It was now a case that he is lying to himself if he was to continue to work, because he's not being honest to what he actually desires, what is the optimal nature of balance in his life. So he, in that case, was repressing or ignoring the desire to balance in the sense of working less. Again, in the second dream, we found a similar thing, a similar pattern, right? The second dream was that this guy was climbing a mountain. He dreamt that he could climb out into air. And in that case, the climber was not recognizing that he was actually in danger of stepping out into air, that he was in danger of doing something silly or stupid. He wasn't recognizing what was emotionally relevant and not consciously seen. And in the third dream, what we find is again the similar pattern. We have a young man who has a bit of an inferiority complex to his father. Not an inferiority complex, but he felt like his life was overshadowed by his father's life. And so what happened to him is what was the dream contents that he dreamt of? It was something that was emotionally relevant and was not recognized by his conscious psyche. So he didn't know why he felt frustrated in life, I imagine. He didn't know why he felt insufficient in his daily life. And then he had this dream, and it clearly demonstrated a series of images which proposed the overall pattern of a repression. And then he had his dream, and in his dream, the father was portrayed as a bumbling idiot, which is just the result of a compensatory reflex on the part of the psyche. So, in each case of these dreams, the reason why I wanted to read these to you is I wanted to demonstrate that in each case, the fundamental commonality between these dreams is that the contents was emotionally relevant and it was not being consciously recognized by the psyche. You know what I said earlier when I said that dreams are one of the most effective tools that we have to developing as individuals. I did mean it. And I think it's because you can only rely so much on philosophy and rules and authorities and so forth, because these are general things. These are general rules that do not have a sensitivity to you as an individual. They only are sensitive to general qualities of human beings. But your dreams will provide you with a regular expression of what is exactly going on in your mind and in your psyche. And I think if you learn to recognize that, if you learn to understand it and enter into that process as a relationship, then I think what will happen is you'll start to develop a lot more quickly, and you'll start to grow much more quickly as an individual, because you are paying attention to the most accurate snapshot in time of what is numinous to you, what you are not acknowledging, and you can make a decision from your conscious perspective and how to integrate that and move forward. And so I think, if you can learn how to interpret dreams, do a study of it, read some of these books. The one I recommended is great, Modern Man in Search of a Soul. I would also highly recommend The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. That delves a lot more deeply into the nature of the archetypes and has a lot of examples to do with myth and folklore and fairy tales and so forth. But I hope you enjoyed this video. I am going to make another video on the anima soon. I think that'll be the next one. And the anima, for you guys out there, is the woman that lives inside of you as your soul and the nature of your passion. So